Picture him for a second. A hunter, standing at the edge of a frozen valley. Muscles carved from a lifetime of chasing, climbing, and surviving. No hospital behind him. No diagnosis waiting. Just raw, visible strength. If you looked at this man, you'd swear cancer was something that belonged to your world, not his. A punishment for fast food, city air, and days spent sitting still. That's the story most of us have been told, but it's wrong. Somewhere in the body. At any point in history, a single cell can make a mistake. It divides when it shouldn't. Then another cell copies that mistake, and another, until something starts growing that was never supposed to be there. In your world, this ends with a doctor, a quiet room, and 3 words that change everything. In his world, there was no room, no doctor, no name for what was happening inside him. Just a slow, invisible war fought without language. Here's the twist. That war didn't start with factories or fast food. It didn't start with us at all. In 2016, in a cave in South Africa, scientists uncovered something small enough to miss. A single foot bone. It belonged to a human ancestor who lived 7 million years ago, long before our species existed. Researchers still debate exactly which early human relative it came from, but what they found inside that bone left little room for debate. It was osteosarcomas and aggressive bone cancer. Not a break, not a poorly healed injury, a tumor. In a skeleton from that same era, they found something else. A second, cancerous growth in the spine. 2 ancient bodies. 2 tumors. One question that refuses to go away. Was cancer really born from modern life? Or has it been hunting our ancestors since before we ever learned to control fire? Before we dig into what these bones are really telling us, hit subscribe, because we're about to walk through nearly 2 million years of evidence, hidden in fossils, mummies, and ancient texts that most people have never heard. And it's going to change the way you think about one of the oldest enemies the human body has ever faced. That foot bone wasn't just cracked or worn down by age. Osteosarcoma works by hijacking bone-building cells, tricking them into multiplying out of control instead of simply repairing damage. The result is a hard, invasive mass growing where solid bone should be, and that's exactly what researchers found preserved in stone for 1.7 million years. The same excavation revealed something else, a benign tumor in the spine of another individual from the same period, not cancerous, but still proof that abnormal cell growth wasn't a rare glitch. It was already a recurring part of ancient life. Here's the catch. Bone survives. Skin, organs, and soft tissue don't. So every tumor we find in a fossil represents only what happened to survive long enough to fossilize. Meaning the cancers we can prove existed are likely just the tip of a much larger, invisible iceberg. Fossils can only tell us so much. Bone survives, the rest of the story doesn't. But move forward a few 100,000 years, into the sands of Egypt, and the evidence starts speaking with a much clearer voice. Researchers scanned 137 Egyptian mummies using CT technology, the same tool your doctor might use today, except this time it was aimed at bodies preserved for thousands of years. Inside those wrapped remains, they didn't just find bone, they found disease frozen in time. Take one woman from that study. Hidden in her preserved tissue was a mass in her breast, one that CT imaging identified as malignant. Somewhere else in that same collection, researchers found a man with clear signs of prostate cancer, the disease slowly working through his body long before he was mummified. These weren't isolated oddities. Across the full set of mummies, scientists documented cases ranging from bone tumors to leukemia, a cancer of the blood itself. Even royalty wasn't spared. Evidence of bone cancer has been identified in remains believed to belong to Egyptian pharaohs. Here's why this matters logically. Fossils gave us a handful of individual cases spread across nearly 2 million years. Mummies gave us dozens of cases from a single, much narrower window of history. That shift alone tells you something important. Cancer wasn't a freak accident that happened once in a while. It was present often enough, in a small enough population, to keep showing up. The Egyptians didn't have CT scanners, but they weren't blind to what was happening inside the body either. Around 600 BCE, someone wrote down what is now called the Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical texts on Earth. Among its case studies is a description of a growth on the breast, hard, spreading, with no clear boundary. The author documents the case in careful detail. Then comes the line that still lands like a gut punch thousands of years later. There is no treatment. Think about what that sentence actually means. This wasn't ignorance. It was observation without power. An ancient physician could see the disease clearly enough to describe it, but had absolutely no way to stop it. That gap between recognizing an enemy and defeating it is the same gap human medicine spent the next 600 years trying to close. Centuries later, the Greek physician Hippocrates looked at tumors and noticed something visual. swollen blood vessels stretching outward from a growth, like limbs radiating from a body. I named it karkinos, the Greek word for crab. When Roman writer Celsus later translated Greek medical texts into Latin, that word became cancer. Every time you hear that word today, you're hearing an image ancient physicians used to describe something they couldn't cure, only recognize. So what is actually happening? Biologically, when this disease takes hold, every second, your body is quietly performing one of the most impressive tasks in nature. Cells divide. Old ones die, new ones replace them, and your DNA gets copied over and over, billions of times a day, almost perfectly, almost. Every so often, that copying process makes a mistake. A tiny error slips into the DNA of a single cell. Most of the time, your body catches it. There's a built-in repair system, and if the damage is too severe to fix, the cell is ordered to self-destruct before it can cause harm. Your immune system acts like a gatekeeper, patrolling for anything that looks abnormal and shutting it down. But sometimes, one mutated cell slips past all of it. It doesn't die. It doesn't get repaired. Instead, it starts dividing, again and again, ignoring every signal telling it to stop. That single rogue cell becomes two become four, and over time, a tumor forms, not because something entered the body from outside, but because something inside the body's own replication process broke down. This is the part that reframes everything. Cancer isn't an infection. It isn't something you catch. It's a malfunction in the exact same process that keeps every living thing alive. Cell division. And that changes the entire scope of the question. Because if cancer is simply a byproduct of cells dividing, then any organism made of dividing cells is a potential target. That's not a theory. It's a documented fact. Paleontologists have identified tumors in the fossilized bones of a hadrosaur, a duck-billed dinosaur that lived roughly 70 million years ago, long before any human or even any mammal resembling us existed. Fish develop tumors, even plants, organisms without blood, without a nervous system, without anything close to a modern lifestyle, can develop abnormal, cancer-like growths when their cells divide incorrectly. Here's the logical chain worth sitting with. If dinosaurs got cancer, and fish get cancer, and plants can develop the botanical equivalent of cancer, then this disease cannot be the result of processed food, pollution, or modern stress. Those factors can influence risk, but they didn't invent the disease. They couldn't have. Cancer predates fast food by tens of millions of years. It predates agriculture. It predates fire. Cancer isn't a punishment for how we live now. It's the price of being made of cells that divide, a price every complex organism on Earth has been paying since long before humans showed up to complain about it. So here's the question worth asking directly. Did ancient humans actually get cancer as often as we do today? The honest answer is, probably not. But not for the reason most people assume. You've likely heard that prehistoric humans only lived to about 25 or 35 years old. That statistic is real, but it's also one of the most misunderstood numbers in history. It doesn't mean adults were dropping dead in their 30s. It means infant and child mortality was brutally high, and those early deaths dragged the average down hard. A hunter who survived childhood, avoided infection, and didn't get killed by a predator or a rival could still live into his 60s or even 70s. Skeletal evidence backs this up. Archaeologists have found plenty of older individuals in ancient burial sites. So if some people did live long enough, why doesn't the fossil record show cancer everywhere? Because most cancers aren't fast. They're slow-building diseases that typically take decades to fully develop. And in the ancient world, decades were exactly what most people didn't get. Long before a slow-growing tumor could turn lethal, ancient humans were far more likely to be killed by something faster. A predator, an infected wound, childbirth, starvation, or a simple broken bone that turned septic. Cancer didn't need to be rare back then. It just rarely got the time it needed to finish the job. There's also a difference in what was actually driving cell damage in the first place. Ancient risk factors look nothing like ours. Smoke inhaled daily from open cooking fires damaged lungs in ways eerily similar to modern cigarette smoke. Chronic parasitic infections, common in early agricultural populations, caused long-term inflammation, a process now well understood to increase cancer risk. Constant, unprotected sun exposure raised the risk of skin cancers. These weren't lifestyle choices. They were unavoidable conditions of being alive in that era. Compare that to today's dominant risk factors. Cigarette smoke instead of hearth smoke. Processed and preserved meats instead of parasites. Obesity and chronic inflammation from sedentary living instead of chronic infection. The mechanisms driving cellular damage, mutation and inflammation haven't changed. Only the source has. This is the logical piece that ties it all together. Cancer wasn't absent in ancient humans. It was outrun. Death simply arrived first, from 100 other directions. Before cancer could finish what it started, our ancestors weren't healthier than us in some untouchable, disease-proof way. They were just facing a world with so many faster ways to die that this particular slow-moving enemy rarely got its chance to win. If cancer has been hunting living things for tens of millions of years, why does it feel like a distinctly modern crisis? Why does almost everyone alive today know someone who's been diagnosed? The answer isn't that cancer became more aggressive. It's that we finally started living long enough and looking closely enough to see it. Start with lifespan. For most of human history, survival meant outrunning fast threats, infection, childbirth, violence, starvation, injuries that turned septic within days. Then came vaccines, antibiotics, clean water systems, modern surgery, safer childbirth, traffic laws, and emergency medicine that turned what used to be fatal injuries into survivable ones. Every one of these advances did the same thing. It removed a fast way to die. And here's the logical consequence that follows directly from that. When you eliminate the diseases and accidents that used to kill people early, you don't eliminate risk. You just give the remaining risks more time to develop. Cancer is exactly that kind of risk. It's slow. It needs decades of accumulated cellular damage to fully form. Ancient humans rarely lived long enough to give it that time. We do, so a disease that was always present is now, for the first time in human history, actually getting the runway it needs to fully take off. Then there's the second half of the equation. We can actually see it now. An ancient physician writing the Edwin Smith Papyrus could feel a hard mass under skin and describe it in detail. But he had no way to look inside the body. No way to know if a healthy-looking hunter was quietly developing a tumor in his lung or his bone marrow. Today, a routine scan can catch a growth long before it produces a single symptom. MRI machines, CT scans, blood tests that detect cancer markers. None of this existed for 99% of human history. We're not just living long enough to develop more cancer. We're diagnosing cancers that, in any other era, would have simply gone unnamed, misattributed to some vague illness, or discovered only after death, if at all. Put those two forces together and the picture becomes clear. Longer lives create more time for slow diseases to fully develop. Better technology means we catch far more of what's actually there. Neither of these facts means cancer itself is spreading faster than it used to. It means we've removed the obstacles that used to hide it. Both the early deaths that cut its timeline short and the medical blindness that used to keep it invisible. Cancer isn't more common today because the modern world created it. It's more visible today because the modern world finally gave it the time and the tools to be seen. Now here's where the story takes a turn nobody sees coming. If cancer is just a numbers game, more cells dividing means more chances for one of them to make a fatal mistake. Then an elephant should be a walking tumor factory. It has roughly 100 times more cells than you do, and each of those cells divides just as often as yours. By pure statistics, elephants should be dropping from cancer constantly. They're not. Elephant cancer rates sit at a fraction of human rates, somewhere below 5%, compared to a much higher lifetime risk in humans. Scientists call this contradiction Peto's paradox, and for decades it had no clear explanation. Then researchers looked at one specific gene, TP53, often nicknamed the guardian of the genome, because its job is to catch damaged cells and stop them before they turn cancerous. Most mammals, humans included, carry exactly one working copy of this gene. Elephants carry roughly 20. Here's the logical payoff. More copies of a damage control gene means a much more aggressive defense system, instead of trying to repair a cell that's gone wrong, the way our single copy often does. An elephant's cells take a zero-tolerance approach. The moment something looks off, that cell is destroyed immediately. No second chances. No room for a mistake to multiply into a tumor. Scale matters, but so does defense. Evolution gave elephants 20 guardians where we only got one. And that detail matters far beyond biology trivia. Researchers are now studying whether this exact mechanism could be borrowed. Whether a version of that elephant-grade defense system might one day be built into human cancer treatment. Which brings us to something bigger than fossils. Mummies, or gene counts. Every threat your ancestors faced never came one at a time. It wasn't just the predator in the grass or the winter with no food. It was also this. An enemy with no teeth, no roar, hiding inside their own cells. Invisible for millions of years. Survival was never about outrunning one danger. It was about a body that could withstand dozens of silent, simultaneous wars. Some fought in plain sight. Some fought completely in the dark. Go back to that hunter standing at the edge of the frozen valley. Strong legs, steady hands, not a single visible sign that anything was wrong. He had no idea that somewhere inside him, or inside someone just like him, a cell could already be dividing when it shouldn't. Quietly starting a war his body had no way to name. That's the part that should stay with you. This fight didn't begin in a hospital. It began in a cave in South Africa, in a foot bone that sat in the dark for 7 million years, waiting for someone to finally understand what it was looking at. Before fire was tamed, before a single word was spoken, before anything we'd recognize as civilization, this enemy was already active inside our ancestors' bodies. And for almost all of that time, we were completely outmatched. We could feel the mass under the skin. We could write it down. The way that Egyptian physician did 4,000 years ago, closing his account with 3 honest words: there is no treatment. We could name it, borrowing the image of a crab's leg stretching out from a tumor. But naming an enemy isn't the same as beating it. That's what makes this moment different. Right now, for the first time in nearly 2 million years, we're not just observing this disease. We're starting to speak its language, the language of mutated genes, of guardian proteins like the one elephants carry 20 copies of immune cells trained to hunt down what shouldn't be there. Chemotherapy, immunotherapy, early detection scans, vaccines that stop certain cancers before they ever take hold. These aren't small advances. They're the first real answers to a threat that spent 7 million years going unanswered. That hunter never got to know what was happening inside him. You do, and that's not a small thing. It's the difference between fighting blind and finally fighting back. If this kind of story, ancient bones telling modern truths, is something you want more of, subscribe now. There's a lot more buried in our past still waiting to be uncovered.